Well, hi, friends.
Hi, Jenny.
We are back for another conversation, and we are continuing our larger conversation on the church and how the church has interacted with some of the most pressing, maybe even controversial or sensitive issues and topics of our time. So we've talked about mental health, we've talked about the neighbor, and today is where we might get in trouble. We might be pressing some people's buttons. We might be, but our hope is that we are giving an opportunity for just a space to question, to wonder, to imagine, to dream, and just talk. Hear each other out and talk, about church and the state. Dun, dun, dun.
I know. It's like the state, all caps, What's the state? That's my first question. It's like, Jamie, what's the state? What does that mean?
I think we're talking about our political governing structure.
Okay.
The boundaries by which we identify ourselves based on, our nations and that. So to me, that's the state, is that political affiliations that keep us bound together as people.
So our government, executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch.
At least as the United States, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk as Americans today,
Yes.
for anyone who might be watching this who do not live in the United States. So we have this Republican government, and it is national, and then it's state, and then it's local. Okay. I was a civics teacher.
I was about to say, look at that. You have so much knowledge.
And so, historically, in the United States, at least, in our founding documents, we've had a separation of church and state, to the betterment or the detriment of our country. That you can hear arguments both ways.
Sure.
What does that even mean to you? I mean, church. Well, maybe let's go back to that. We define state. What is church in your definition? Is it just the local church? Is it the church universal? What do you mean by church?
Well, I think most people associate church with brick and mortar of a structure located in a community. But I think, church is not, I don't think that's a reduction of what church is. Church is a movement of people who profess Jesus as Lord. And so, and again, even in church, we align ourselves in somewhat of a political structure, political way, or through either denominations or whatever it might be, structures. But at the end of the day, for me, church is a group of people who are participating in a movement, professing that Jesus is Lord and doing so publicly.
Okay. And would you say the United States has historically been a church associated with the Christian church?
Say that again?
That the United States has historically been associated with the Christian church?
Yeah. I mean, I think, from the pilgrims who landed to, and who were escaping religious persecution themselves. And so I think there's always been this DNA in our culture of whether you want to call it Christian nationalism or being a Christian nation or, whatever that means. And we can talk about that. But I think it has been sort of an underlining, it shapes a lot of our public conversations.
Well, of course it does. I mean, we started out with "In God We Trust," and we have creeds and things that go along with the Christian faith that have historically, but yet it seemed like the founding fathers were trying to come up with this balance so that we're not a theocracy. And do you know what I mean by like a theocracy? So is there a movement in the United States for us to have a theocracy now? Do you think?
I think,
Is that a good thing or not a good thing? I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely think that there is some movements of people who are wanting there to be more of a theocracy than there currently is. Whether that's good or bad, I think I have my own thoughts on it. I don't think that we should be to the point that maybe some people want us to be. You know, you probably heard similar terms like Christian nationalism, or other things like that, you know, and I think that it becomes a dangerous, slippery slope when we start to try to make such blurred lines there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you, do either of you have friends that are of different faith traditions?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you do. And so it can feel very disenfranchising to people who are not Christian. If you're in a place that is the understood language and it's not, you're not welcome at the table kind of feel, because you're wrong.
Yeah, your faith is not correct. And so
Yeah, and so the dangerous part about having a theocracy is that people can lose some of their civil rights,
well, the United States was founded on this idea that all men are created equal and that we have this religious freedom. And so, you know, there's just worries of what that would look like if we did become a theocracy.
Well, the problem with the theocracy is that theocracy works only for those who are in power.
Exactly. That's
And-
that's really what I was trying to say.
You know, I
Thank
mean,
you for saying it that
And
way.
so-
You can't say that.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's, to me, that's the fear of that, is that because at the core of idolatry is creating God in our own image, and so, you know, and that's sort of I think a theocratic way of looking at the world, is that, you know, those in power create God in their image, and that's the God that they are expecting everybody else to follow, and I think
Yeah.
that there's a danger in that.
So we're seeing the dark side of theocracy, but surely there's got to be some positive, side to it. Like, why people would want to become.
I guess if you had a rule of church over a rule of law, then all the law would obey the church, and you would have a common language. We wouldn't deal with all this messy, subjective, right and wrong stuff. And but you know, I'm always going to look back to Scripture. You picked out a couple scriptures for the actual in person, and Paul is writing the Romans and telling them to be subject to authority. And yet earlier in Acts, Luke is writing that Paul teaches God's authority trumps man's authority. And then Jesus is like, render unto Caesar that which Caesar. And so, like, when we're talking, I'm like, it just sounds to me like God is saying, be a good citizen.
Yeah.
Well,
Practice civics
again-
101. I mean, vote, get engaged in your community, be a good neighbor. Like we were talking last week. If you're a good leader, run for office, but don't be oppressive with your ideology.
Paul
So-
in Romans, and just that simple statement gives away why he says what he says in Romans 13. I mean, he writes the letter to the Romans are living in where? Rome.
Yeah.
So he's there. You have this minority group of Christians who are no longer saying Caesar is Lord. They're saying Jesus is Lord. And when you and so they're creating a community of people. They're creating a political movement. The church is a political movement. They're creating a political movement that is contrary to the belief system of the Romans by saying Jesus is Lord and Caesar is not. So Paul is living into that tension of also the balance between, okay,
Yeah.
you're living, and I don't want people to read in that when Paul says, you know, honor those in authority, respect those in authority. He's saying that through the lens of actually actually working against those in authority by saying Jesus is Lord, because those in authority are expected to say, no, Caesar is Lord. So there's a huge tension there, and I'm still fleshing that out a little bit.
Yeah, and it's almost to me like I hear you saying, please pick your battles. This is not the way forward for us to take on this giant authority at this time in this way. Jesus didn't. He didn't try to overthrow the Roman government. His was a movement from the ground up.
Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's.
Yeah.
He was all about flipping.
And then he was like, seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you, and turn the other cheek. And if they take your cloak, you give them your shirt too. And all of that does not sound like this warrior Christ that a lot of us want to follow.
Well, what it does too is it reminds us that the church is actually a third way, or it's a way that is, and I think particularly today we play these cultural wars with cultural society, and we talk about secular and secularization and all of that, and so, but I think what's being asked of us in this day and age is for the church to be the church, I mean, that's the reason Jesus uses language like salt and light. The church is is a community. It's not individuals, it's a community. And it's a community of people who practice forgiveness. And so you think about that and how that looks in light of everything else in our world, which is a dog eat dog kind of world, and might is right kind of world, where Jesus comes along and says all the things that you said earlier. Yeah. To me, it's a testimony that what he's inviting us into is to show the world there is a different way to live.
So good, Jamie. I mean, it's true. It is really true, and it's really the only thing that makes a difference at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Because one is a death cycle, and the other is a resurrection cycle.
Correct. And so we need to be faithful citizens and work toward a greater civic good, all of that. But at the end of the day, my salvation is not dependent upon who sits in the White House. My salvation is dependent upon a resurrected Christ that I claim as Lord of my life.
So
flip the table.
I know, but let me just play devil's advocate then. Then why is the church known for grabbing the White House? Like, we have to have the White House, or we have to have this many amount of Supreme Court justices. Is that we feel like is it? I don't have the answer. Is it because we feel like that we're losing something, that it's threatened, that even though the gates of hell will not prevail against it, bad politics will?
Yeah, I mean, my generation, well, I'll speak for myself. I feel like it looking on the outside, looking in, it looks like we feel threatened by secularization. I don't think secularization is the problem. I think if we could just go back to being a good neighbor, or being good people, being Christ followers, following the way of Jesus instead of following the way of politics and government, then we wouldn't feel threatened by the other things that are happening. We wouldn't feel like we have to have a Christian leader in power or
professed Christian. I mean, there's probably been presidents who are Christians. They just didn't.
Yeah, and I think that's what it boils
make
down
that
to.
Their platform,
yes,
so to speak,
is that, and you both know my heart. My heart is for those outside the church, and so one of the things that concerns me is, particularly with Jenny's generation and even younger, is that we're losing entire generations of people into the church. Yeah. And I think, to be honest, that's where the rise of secularization is coming, is that because we have people that are walking away from the church because we've not done a good enough job. We've not done a good job in the church being the church.
Yeah.
That's it.
And people, and they're questioning. I talk to people who've walked away from the church, and part of the conversation is, particularly young adults, is that I'm not even sure the church believes what it says it believes.
Right. That's it. Even my son will say, well, it's kind of irrelevant to me
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, he practices his own faith, and I'm like, you need to be in community and all this, and he's like, but it's irrelevant to me. There's no, I always have this phrase where I say it's a lot of squeeze for not a lot of juice, and he's just saying there's no fruit.
And I wonder if some people
no
think that
juice, no
having, for instance, more Christian leaders in politics or more Christian centered laws or whatever, I think some people think, well, maybe that will help people think that maybe that will help the church become more relevant, or that will help people. I don't know.
That's a generous explanation.
That is a very generous, but
the non-generous explanation is it's a power grab.
Yeah. And either way, my generation and others look at it and go, if that's what you're about, we don't want anything with it.
Yeah, I laughingly call that that's the hell in a handbasket theology. He's like, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It started when we took the prayer out of the schools, and then it went into we don't have the 10 Commandments up, and I'm like, can you even tell me what those are? You know,
and how many do you live
by?
And
I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm laughing. I'm not laughing at that. I understand that, but I also want to say, how integrated is that? You know, how caring of neighbor is that really? If people of prayer, people of resurrection, people of the gospel are those people, no matter whether it's mandated by the state. And, I hear a lot of fear, and perfect love casts out fear. And we're not supposed to be people of fear. And fear theology is scary theology to me.
Because it almost feels like it is. You don't know what's going to happen next. There is no telling. You can't. Fear theology is just
siege mentality.
We're going for it.
Yeah. I think, Michelle, back to your comment about your son and not seeing the church as relevant for his faith development or growth. I think it's because I think as church leaders, one thing that I challenge church leaders, we've reduced our role to simply being chaplains to people who think like us and act like us, and so instead of taking on the role of prophet or
Jamie,
priest,
that's really convicting.
and I think there's a responsibility for church leaders, because the reality is that we are creating silos of ministry now, calling them churches, but.
Wow.
But we're not, people are coming into church with their already thought out, I won't even say thought out, I already felt, because I think...
or it's just what you grew up in, and you can't, convictions.
Sort of their already made up convictions, and they're bringing those to the gospel. They're bringing those to the communion table. They're bringing those to their small groups and their Bible studies and stuff. Instead of saying, I'm coming and I'm going to allow the Holy Spirit to work within this community to shape me to be more Christ-like. And so they've got a certain lens that they're putting on to read everything through, and we all do it. All of us do it.
But we have to be self-aware enough to recognize it and to not be defensive when someone comes with a new way of thinking or a question, even. But when you have people who have to leave this congregation to go to this congregation because they worry about politics or they feel threatened. I mean, that's just the worst feeling, to feel threatened in your own church, and
or feel like you've been made out to be the bad guy.
Or the bad guy, yeah. So as we're wrapping up, church and state, what's our responsibility as Christ followers and people who believe in the church?
I think one of those responsibilities is asking ourselves, what am I allowing my convictions to be shaped by? Is my conviction shaped? Am I allowing my convictions to be shaped by Christ and the teachings of Jesus, or am I allowing my convictions to be shaped by something other than, and then bringing those to to Christ, and then draping those around the cross. And so I think that's the conviction
That's
that
hard.
I need to ask myself. Am I
All
doing?
of us need to do that.
Yeah.
That's very,
Yeah.
for all of us.
And so, again, we just come back to this. We are forgiven people. We must walk in humility. We must ask God to make us wise, discerning, and loving, because we don't do that very naturally. And so, the way the church intersects with just being a citizen in this world.
And an alien of this world.
And
if
an
I can use,
alien too, yeah.
A language of one of
You
my
do,
favorite
I
books.
mean,
So, but
yeah,
we're
which book?
resident aliens.
Which book
And
is it? Do you remember?
Herawas and Willimon
Herawas.
wrote. I think it's written back in the late '80s, maybe. So,
But I think even Peter says that we're strangers and aliens in this world too.
and that's where they
You know,
base
and
that off of.
I grew up singing this song in my Southern Gospel church, which says, "This world is not my home. I'm just passing through." And I always thought it was like heaven theology. And, you know, I was a teenager. I didn't want to go to heaven yet, you know. And but now I get it a little bit more. I was like, I even told Mark the other day, I was like, I feel like such a weirdo in this world. I just feel so strange and weird, and I get weary of it. So I guess I'm just starting to understand what those hymn writers were actually talking about, you know. But
Well, we have the hard work. The church is a colony in a world in opposition to the values of Christ, and we're called to live that out in all that we do and say.
so go be yeast, and
Yes,
go be a mustard seed, and
exactly.
go be a light.
Man.
Let's do it.
So
Jimmy.
together, what if? Let's go. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next week.
In the darkness we were waiting, without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for the sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. And the morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, all the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born. Then the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel and shall not faint. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who is resurrected me. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Praise forever to the King of Kings.